Hello, and welcome to this episode of the WARC Podcast. My name is Paul Stringer, and I'm the Managing Editor of Research and Insights at WARC. Now, today, we're going to be talking about the Future of Measurement 2026. That's the title of a new report that is out now on the WARC platform, and in this conversation, we're going to explore two key trends from the report: media's shift to outcomes measurement, and more broadly, how AI is reshaping measurement as we try to separate the hype from reality. I'm really pleased to say that I've got Michael Kaminsky here, who's joining me for the conversation. He's a measurement expert. You might be familiar with him already. He's very active on platforms like LinkedIn. And he's also the co-founder of the Incrementality platform, Recast. But before we speak to Michael, let's hear a very quick word from one of our sponsors.
The world of sport is being disrupted. It's never been more important for brands to understand the power players, from individual athletes to powerful sports leagues. Lion Sport brings together the brightest minds in sports, creativity, and innovation in a 2-day exclusive program at Cannes Lions. Whether you're redefining fan engagement, leveraging emerging tech, or creating iconic cultural moments, Lion Sport is where the game changes. It's time to get competitive. Secure your seat now at canneslions.com.
Michael, welcome to the WARC Podcast.
Paul, thanks for having me. I am so glad to be here. So excited to talk about this.
Awesome. Well, you've promised me lots of hot takes, so I'm particularly excited for this conversation. And I want to dive straight into our first trend, which is all about media's growing emphasis on outcomes measurement. So this is the idea that media is increasingly bought against specific outcomes rather than, proxy metrics like reach. It's a trend that started a long time ago with the digital platforms, but what we're seeing now is legacy media like television are trying to show their impact on business results and demonstrate outcomes to win back some of those highly prized SME performance budgets from big tech. So my first question to you is, what do you make of this trend, and particularly this shift among legacy media like television towards trying to embrace outcomes measurement?
I think it's a wonderful thing and honestly long overdue. Honestly, I think a big part of the problem here is that a lot of the legacy media vendors got complacent when they were the only game in town. And so they didn't have to prove that much effectiveness. And that was just where the dollars happened to flow for lots of structural reasons and historical reasons. And it's always been sort of crazy to me that these really big advertisers would spend such huge amounts of money without really understanding how that was actually driving the bottom line for their business. So I think, people should have been doing this all along. They always should have been thinking about what outcomes are we getting for these dollars that we're investing in, any advertising platform, for any media budget that we're spending. And so I'm really glad to see that, this same lens of accountability is being applied uniformly or universally across all different media budgets. I think, we can talk about what's easy to measure and what's hard to measure and how that can lead to other problems. But I truly believe that every marketing team, every budget holder, every CMO should be thinking about, hey, what am I really getting for these dollars or pounds or euros that I'm investing? How certain am I that that's actually the case? And how am I going to make the case to the CFO that this is actually a worthwhile investment for the business?
Interesting, because I think, you definitely reflect a point of view there. It sounds like you're obviously a kind of support and advocate this position. I've seen some interesting pushback as well on this idea of legacy media embracing outcomes. Some say that actually metrics like trust are way more important, particularly in the context of what's happening with digital media, the fact that a lot of these platforms aren't regulated and measured in the same robust way that platforms like television are. Do you think there's space for other metrics like trust? Do you think television should also be leaning on those as a source of competitive advantage? Or do you think this is really quite a single-minded race around outcomes measurement?
Well, so I think trust is an outcome, and it's totally fine to put that as a metric that you care about. But I think if I'm the CFO, there's going to be two things that I am going to want to see. One, that spending these dollars on TV actually increases trust in our brand or in our products in some meaningful, measurable way, right? So that's the first thing that you have to see. Okay, you claim that you're generating trust for us. Let's make sure that we can actually verify. Let's see the outcome that we're actually increasing trust via this marketing campaign. That's the first thing to see. The second thing to see is that as trust increases, that is actually linked to sales. Again, probably not going to be perfectly precise, but I'm going to want to see those two things, see at least evidence of those two things, see a plan for how are we going to evaluate if we're actually getting those two things. I've seen plenty of pitch decks where these all kinds of different media players, not just legacy, also very new ones, saying that they're going to generate, brand awareness and trust. And then, everybody's like, great, that seems really valuable. And then you go and you try to measure it later and you say like, okay, well, if we actually generated more brand awareness, we should see a change in our brand awareness metrics over the time period that we're running this campaign, right? That's what they promised us. And it's perfectly flat. There's no movement. So it's like, okay, if you are going to claim that that is the value that you're creating, great, but you need to actually come up with a plausible, good way to measure it, where we're actually going to see a change in that value. And then we need some way to plausibly connect that to sales at the end of the day.
Makes sense. Yeah, makes complete sense. And in the report, we talk about this shift to outcomes. And as I mentioned at the top of introducing this trend, obviously this is something that the digital platforms have really embraced for a number of years now. But what's kind of interesting, particularly among the digital platforms, is we're seeing that outcomes are no longer something that are just measured, but increasingly used to guide optimization decisions. So we've got solutions like Meta's Incremental Attribution product, which uses machine learning to optimize ad delivery for incremental conversions. And the platforms claim these tools can outperform manual campaigns. So I'm wondering, first of all, what you make of these AI powered solutions like PMax and Advantage Plus, but also what you think of this idea of outcomes measurement being something actually more higher up in the process, more around guiding optimization and not just being something you do at the end of a campaign.
So really interesting questions here. I think Meta and Google have been using machine learning and quote unquote AI to power targeting to try to drive incremental sales for the entire time that they've been in existence, right? So this is not a new thing. And I think it's good. One of the things that makes them such incredibly effective advertising platforms, and again, you can see it in how just empirically by how much advertisers spend on those platforms, is because they do a really good job at driving those incremental sales. I talk about this a lot. My partner is a translator and she runs a very small translation agency. And it is very clear when she turns on ads on Google that she gets a lot more leads. You can just feel it there. You don't have to do any sophisticated measurement at all to see that that's happening. I think many, many, many businesses, both small and very large, have had that same experience advertising on Google and Facebook because they're simply very good. I think that it is good for the ecosystem as a whole, for any advertiser, that those platforms continue to test out new ways of being even more efficient and effective. And so whether that is using AI or machine learning or, LLMs or not, I actually don't care that much. And I don't think advertisers in general should care that much, because they should be evaluating the performance of those platforms outside externally, right? Thinking about how do we run experiments to see what is the true incremental lift being driven by Meta. And I should be setting my bid targets or my budget on Meta based on how much incremental sales or revenue that's driving for us. And how Meta gets there, I don't have to worry about, right? I think a lot of marketers they lose the forest for the trees trying to really understand all of the details of Meta's algorithm. And my advice is like, look, you should be stepping back. You should think about how my app going to evaluate the effectiveness of this platform holistically, and then let Meta worry about Meta's, person level targeting algorithm however they want. And if you are confident in your evaluation method that sits outside of Meta, then you don't have to worry about it. You can just let Meta get better and better and better at targeting over time.
So this is about, these are incredibly powerful tools, but if you rely on them exclusively to tell you about your marketing performance, then you might run into trouble, right? Independent validation's key.
That is my view, is that independent validation is 100% key. Again, I've talked to a lot of data scientists at Meta and Google. I think they're very good. I think they put into place, very reasonable measurement frameworks, but they're still biased towards their own platform, right? Whether it's subconsciously or consciously. And as a marketer or as a brand, you don't want to have to be thinking about the details of that, right? And the way to avoid having to think about the details of that is to have your own external measurement framework that allows you to evaluate if you're heading in the right direction or not. And then that sort of aligns incentives with everyone nicely. If you have your measurement framework set up properly, then Meta is effectively incentivized to make sure that they're delivering incremental conversions for you, and how they get there, you don't have to think about the details of it.
What one kind of aspect of this that often comes up when we're looking at kind of channel bias or this issue of these platforms being slightly black box in nature is around kind of cross media effects or halo effects. So, if you're advertising within Facebook's ecosystem, how does that impact your e-commerce sales, or how does it drive retail footfall? And is that the kind of thing that you can also be measuring through kind of independent testing? It's not something you can do on platform, right?
Yes, exactly. And I think if you have a good holistic framework, it actually generalizes nicely. You don't even really have to think about it that much. If you have a good process for running incrementality experiments, there's different ways to think about doing that. But that process is going to apply to your e-commerce store exactly the same way that it's going to apply to your Amazon sales, exactly the same way that it's going to apply to your brick and mortar sales, exactly the same way that it's going to apply to your sales at Walmart or Target or Boots or, whatever retailer we're talking about. So a good holistic external measurement system, again, it just lets you not have to worry about all of the details of tracking and exactly what does Facebook have insight into. You want to give Facebook or Meta or Google or whoever as much data as you can so that they can do their optimization job as well as they can. But when it comes to measurement and evaluation, you want to have this good external framework for external validation so that you can see, hey, when we look at this from the outside, is it actually driving our business forward? And we should be able to apply those same methods to, all of our different retailer distribution channels, not just e-commerce that has a pixel on it.
Heading to Cannes Lions this year? On June 23rd, WARC is co-hosting the first ever Lions Insight and Strategy Summit with TMRE, the market research event. It's a day for insights and marketing leaders to explore sharper strategy, better ideas, and stronger business results. With case studies, debates, and honest conversations from leading brands doing the work. If you're interested in how insights drive growth and effectiveness, we'll see you in Cannes. Learn more and get your festival pass at canneslions.com.
And I want to continue this theme of AI measurement with our next trend. And it was really interesting doing the research for this report and thinking about how AI is beginning to transform measurement. And a recurring theme that I came across was this idea that AI is helping move measurement from this backwards looking rear view reporting function into a system that enables kind of real time decision making, that it supports more dynamic planning and optimization. And of course, this is a gradual process, right? We're only beginning to see analytics teams now primarily start to adopt AI for things like data heavy lifting, so automating collection, cleaning, normalization, before human analysts start to interpret those results. But I think one of the reasons why people are very excited about AI is that it is going to help automate some of the grunt work of measurement. So humans can focus on some of those higher level strategic tasks like interpreting and contextualizing results, testing new hypotheses, deciding how to allocate budgets across channels, etc. Is this where you're beginning to see AI make an impact for you, for your business, around this more low-level automation and data heavy lifting at this stage in kind of your development?
I think a little bit. Transparently, a lot of the data cleanup stuff, I actually think, at least in the context of a lot of the marketing data that I deal with, has honestly been a solved problem for a long time before the invention of AI. There are lots of these tools that connect to all of your different advertising platforms, pull all that data into a data warehouse for you in a nice clean format. They can do a lot of the normalization. Maybe there was like 45 minutes of work to like do the channel mapping, but it wasn't like an exhausting process that people were spending months and months and months on. It was a like one-time setup, and then it just sort of works. And so again, I think a lot of, you know, either more modern marketing teams or teams more on the cutting edge, they've been doing this for years. And so the data cleanup process hasn't been super painful for them. And so I think, again, AI can help with that a little bit. It makes it a little bit more efficient, but I don't necessarily see that as being the place where AI is bringing a huge win into a lot of marketing teams. The place where I do see change is on more of the like planning side, right?
Okay.
Building a marketing plan is a quite complicated activity. Often it requires the synthesis of a lot of different data points. Oh, hey, we think that CPMs are going to go up in the United States next year because there's an election. And hey, we've noticed from the incrementality test that we run that we're getting worse performance on meta retargeting than we have been in the past. And hey, we have this vendor and they say this thing. And so I, as an analyst, need to take all of that information together and then try to build a marketing plan. And then I'm going to produce it. And then the finance team's going to look at it and they're going to like hate it for a bunch of different reasons. And I have to go back and do it again. And so that piece of like, hey, I need to construct this budget. It needs to fit into all of these different constraints from different teams and different people's beliefs and things that they want to do, and sort of incorporate all of this different information together and then use that to make a budget that we can actually follow. That's a place where there's actually like lots and lots of really sort of gross, grungy manual work in Excel. And that's a place where we've seen actually a really big opportunity for agents and AI to, sort of do, again, this term is so overused, I can't believe I'm going to say it, but like be the co-pilot on the planning stage of how we're going to invest these marketing dollars. And that feels like a place where I see a lot more impact than on like the data cleanup, which again, I think there's some small places for it where it can be very helpful, but not as big of an impact as I think some people are pitching.
And I want to return to that subject actually in just a moment when we talk about agentic applications of agentic in measurement. The other really interesting area I think for AI or potential for AI is around measurement frequency. So basically allowing teams to increase the number of incrementality tests that they're running, the refresh rate of their models through AI as well. Do you think that AI is going to enable quicker speed to insight and help collapse this distance between measurement and activation?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting question. And one of my hot takes is I think not really. And the
Okay.
reason why is because the blockers to refreshing an frequently and running more incrementality tests today are not technical problems. It's not the case that, oh, the slowness is in the code writing, right? That's the thing that the LLMs are really good at. Like you can set up an today. It's just code. You can run it. You can do any of the open source tools. You can run it every single day. There's literally no blocker to that. And an agent doesn't change that, right? The code is set up. You can set a cron job on your computer. You can run it every night at midnight and it will run. So that can't possibly be the blocker, right? And so the idea of like, oh, an agent is going to make that process faster, it doesn't really make sense to me. It doesn't click to me as to what an agent would be doing that would make that process faster. It's totally possible to do that refresh a day. Today, it's very easy to, again, there's all of these open source tools to very quickly sort of design a bunch of different incrementality experiments that you can go run. Maybe again, it takes an analyst a day to do that without an agent. And then like with an agent, it's 2 hours, but like you're going from 8 hours to 2 hours. That's not a huge, enormous unlock from using an agent for that process. The problems today with why these refresh cadences or these learning cadences are very slow, they tend to be organizational. They tend to be, you see things like risk aversion, right? Where people don't actually want to go experiment for lots of different reasons. They're worried that it's going to show, a story that they aren't really excited about telling, right? So that is a good reason that lots of people put up blockers to going to run these different experiments. People are scared to find out if the emperor doesn't have any clothes. They're same thing with MMM. A lot of the MMM results, again, it's not the technical difficulty of running the MMM. It's, ooh, how do I tell this story to the boss? Or, ooh, the MMM actually doesn't seem right. What do we do? Who is going to like fudge the results to like make it look right? And like that stuff, I guess maybe you can have an agent do it. But again, it feels like those are more organizational and human problems of what do we
Yeah.
do when we don't trust the MMM? And I don't think an agent solves that for you. Running more bad models faster is a thing that an agent can definitely enable, but that's not the
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah. So it's much more to do with culture than capabilities, right?
It has I think it has a lot more to do with culture, organizational, how well the organization is embracing an attitude around experimentation and sort of a willingness to fail and a willingness to learn. Those are the things that end up being the practical blockers today, much more so than the technical piece. The technical pieces on incrementality, experiments, and MMM are both very, very straightforward and easy to deal with. Again, at least with the idea of like a refreshing. Um, the the problems generally actually sit outside of that, and those are the places where it's very unclear to me how much an agent actually helps you versus just spewing out more data faster, which if you don't trust it, if you're not willing to learn from it, if you're not willing to do anything about it, doesn't actually help you.
Are you familiar with the IPA's paper, Making Effectiveness Work? I think it makes that exact point. I think it's very interesting because what they talk about there is needing to have a learning culture in your organization to really enable measurement. Like you can have all the capabilities in the world, but unless you have a very clear learning culture within the business and one that lots of different stakeholders outside of marketing are bought into, you're never going to be able to actually, create quicker learning loops and incrementally improve what you're doing as marketers. It's the cultural piece that is so much more important in some ways than how fancy and sophisticated your tools are.
I think that's exactly right. One of the things that I talk a lot about is that measurement that doesn't lead to a change in behavior is pure theater. Right? You can build all of the models that you want, but if it does not lead to you actually changing your marketing budget, doing something different than what you were going to do before, then it didn't do anything for you. It can't have done anything for you. The only way that measurement can create value is if it leads it to a change of behavior. If it tells you to say, hey, we're going to increase spend on television and we're going to take dollars away from our digital platforms or vice versa or whatever, right? But you have to make a change from something you were going to do, you weren't going to do anyway. And that is what can actually possibly create value. It doesn't necessarily create value. That could be a bad decision and you end up losing money. But if you don't make any changes, you're not creating any value. And many organizations, for lots of different reasons, are resistant to change. And so until your organization can embrace this idea of, hey, we're going to make changes, it's going to be uncomfortable. It means that the channel manager for this channel is going to be really sad because we took budget away. Or the agency person who, takes me out to the steak dinner every month is going to be, very frustrated because we're taking budget away from their agency. Until you're willing to accept those costs and live with them via this process of making changes, you're not going to be able to create any value for your organization, no matter how fancy your measurement model is.
And I've got one more question for you actually on this subject of how AI is transforming measurement, but it is more focused on capabilities again. So we've touched on agentic AI there slightly, in this idea, as you said, of kind of co-pilots and having these virtual assistants that help you with all sorts of measurement tasks. The other kind of thing that I think is interesting that seems to be bubbling up around MMM at the moment specifically is the development of what we call foundation models. So I'll do my best to explain this, but a little bit like ChatGPT or Claude, these large language models, right? They're trained on these vast general data sets. And we're seeing this idea emerge that you can kind of do the same with MMM. So instead of training a marketing mix model on a client's historical data, you train it on billions of data points from a whole universe of different brands and categories, the idea being that these models are kind of more intelligent because they learn from a wider range of contexts. They're less dependent on historical data, so you avoid that cold start bias that people talk about with MMM. It's really helpful for small brands, and also that they can be refreshed and updated more quickly as they learn more from this new data that they're being fed. So they're also called not just foundation models, but generalist models. And I'm wondering if you have a particular point of view on this idea of generalist models versus bespoke models.
I am very skeptical of this idea. And I'll talk a little bit about why that is. So the first point is because every brand is different, every marketing channel is different, and both brands and marketing channels change over time. I have seen this so many times where, brand A and brand B look very similar. They have similar products, they operate in similar spaces, they have similar customers. For brand A, YouTube is one of their best performing channels, and for brand B, it is terrible. Why is that? Well, there's lots and lots and lots of details on how do you make YouTube work for your brand. Maybe brand A, the one that has really good YouTube performance, their founder was an influencer and so understands at a very deep level how do you make content that goes viral and that people really like. And brand B just can't copy that. And just launching on YouTube does not get you that same level of performance. Creative quality matters. Channel management matters. How you set up these campaigns, how you manage them, how you coordinate with other marketing channels, all of these things matter a lot. And they can change. You could, brand A could get worse, brand B can get better. The market dynamics around these brands can change really dramatically over fairly short periods of time. And so the idea that, I'm going to learn about what works for all of these other brands from a bunch of historical data and then apply it to your brand, I'm just very skeptical that it's going to be able to generate good recommendations. Or like that it's going to learn the right things about my brand in order to know how YouTube is going to work for me. And again, it also sort of makes it seem like, whether or not I have good creative on YouTube doesn't matter because this model says that YouTube tends to work or tends to not work for brands like mine. So all of like that makes me very skeptical of this idea. This is a very different environment than the environment of like learning how to write code, which is like very structured. It works sort of forever. There's, version 1, version 2, obviously things can evolve. But it's very easy to understand how token generation can lead to the ability to write software really, really well, as Claude has demonstrated. It's really easy to think about how token generation can lead to, how to produce sentences and paragraphs that are very coherent. So that is very different to me than understanding, hey, YouTube is going to be a good channel for your brand. That just, it's a totally different type of problem than the way that LLMs tend to work. So maybe what these people are pitching is something different. Again, I haven't seen any of the details on it, but broadly, I'm very skeptical of the idea because my brand is different than every other brand, and my marketing performance is heavily dependent on things that are under my control, including creative quality, including strategy. And so I'm very skeptical that the idea that like, if I look at a bunch of data that look like brands like yours, I'm going to be able to tell you what works for you. It just doesn't make sense to me.
And when thinking through some of the limitations of kind of traditional MMM, so this idea of cold start bias, not having enough historical data to be able to run accurate models, are those concerns still kind of top of mind for you? Like how does a small brand think about running a model? Do they need to run a model? What tends to be your advice for smaller organizations who maybe, don't have the historical data that larger ones do?
Yeah. So just to be clear, the amount of historical data that you need for an MMM is like 2 years. So it's not a huge amount of historical data. And so if we're talking about brands that don't have 2 years of data that have only been around for, less than 24 months, we're talking about generally very, very small brands that are very, very new. And for all of them, I would say definitely don't run a media mix model. Like the problems that you have as a business are surely not going to be solved or addressed very well by a media mix model. One of the things that I also say is that media mix models and marketing mix models, sometimes people are like, he's talking about media mix models, but not marketing mix models. I use those terms interchangeably. If you're listening to this, you can sort of assume that I'm talking about whichever version you like the best. MMMs are the worst form of marketing measurement. They are so error prone. They are so generally misleading. The vast majority of them are worthless or create negative value. So for like a very small organization, if you've only been around for 14 months and you're trying to figure out if your if you can even sell your product at all, like an MMM is a total waste of time for you. You should not be thinking about it at all. There's way more things that you should be focused on.
I'm intrigued to see where generalist models go in the future, because there seems to be some measurement vendors that are beginning to experiment with ideas of generalist models. Some people argue, there's an interesting paper that I reference in the report from Amazon saying that really no true generalist model is yet available on the market, but there are vendors who are beginning to experiment with allowing their clients to query their database of client data that is obviously anonymized, but to essentially benchmark their performance or get a little bit more context around their performance versus their category, for example. So it's kind of light touch generalist intelligence and not a full-blown generalist model, if that makes sense.
I think benchmarking is a totally reasonable activity and a totally good thing to do. But again, that's been around for like 30 years. So that is not particularly new.
Yeah.
Benchmarking overall, I think, is great. If you have the data, you should do it. But I'm skeptical of this idea of, and this also comes up today, right? Even outside of like an LLM, but some brand saying, I looked at the benchmark and it looks like other brands like mine have a lot of success with YouTube. I'm going to launch YouTube. What are the chances? And I'm just going to assume that I get the same results as the rest of the benchmark. I think that's a very bad idea and going to lead to a lot of like wasted money. So don't do that.
And just before we close, because I'm conscious of, we've covered a lot of ground there, covered a lot of different subjects. Is there any other final comments from you, Michael? Thoughts, observations on what we've covered today, or just more broadly than that, any big trends that you're seeing in the measurement space for marketers to kind of keep an eye on over the next 12 months?
Yeah, so I'd say marketers, as always, marketing measurement is a space that is filled with snake oil vendors. They want to sell marketers this magic cure-all that is going to solve all of your problems, and it's going to tell you what really works and what doesn't. Unfortunately, the problem of marketing measurement is incredibly difficult. The thing that actually matters, true incrementality, is very, very difficult to measure. It is very, very hard. There are no silver bullets. Just because you drop an LLM onto it doesn't actually mean that all of a sudden you're measuring the correct thing. And so my message to marketers is to stay vigilant. There are no silver bullets. You're going to have to think hard about how are you going to evaluate whether your marketing is working, how you're going to evaluate whether the vendors are doing what they say they're able to do, and that's not going to go away. So with every new technology change, a bunch of new vendors come onto the scene that try to sell these magic beans. It happened with, digital advertising. It happened with mobile. It's happening now with agents and LLMs. Marketers need to be skeptical of all of these claims, right? You need to be very thoughtful about exactly what you're buying, exactly how you're going to know if it works or not. Because in general, most of them don't. Most of them don't actually create very much value. They don't, they give you the fancy dashboards, but they don't actually help you create value for the business by making change, which is the thing that really matters at the end of the day.
Wise words, very wise words. Thank you. And for our listeners, just a reminder that the Future of Measurement report is now live on the WARC site. So do go check that out if you want to read more on the topics that we've discussed today. But that's it for this episode of the WARC Podcast. If you like what you've heard, please do follow us on your favorite podcasting platform. And if you really liked it, leave us a review. Until next time, thanks for listening.